All good, perfect. Then thank you so much again, and also a quick thanks to my colleagues who are not here today, but who have influenced this presentation, Sophia Paglierin and Wouter Spekking. I come from a different perspective than the previous speakers, and that is that I am trained as a qualitative researcher, and so I tend to work a lot with qualitative data, but the question of causality also pops up. In particular, if you want to do more than just describing things, you need to think about how to relate pieces of qualitative data with other pieces of qualitative data. And so what I would like to talk about today is how we map, or how we try to map, social processes of any kind. And it all goes back to emergence. I don't need to explain that in this crowd, but I want to stress this quote here from Andrew Abbott, now 1992, who says social reality happens in sequences of actions located within constraining or enabling structures. Now, mind you, Abbott was not talking about emergence as such. I don't think he paid particular attention to that term. He wouldn't consider himself a complexity scientist, but he describes very much the same thing. And what is important here is that if we look at social reality, that there are various ways in which something can be achieved, or there are also various conditions that may achieve the same thing. And on top of it, to make it even more complicated, sometimes the absence of a certain condition can cause something. In Abbott's own work, who has focused on social work, he noticed how the disappearance of church in American society, relative disappearance, let me put it that way, actually contributed to the arrival of social work. So the disappearance of one factor, but also always in conjunction with other factors. So yes, looking at social processes, we see certain pathways that may be triggered under certain conditions, and this implies equifinality and multifinality. In other words, different sets of conditions may cause a similar outcome, or similar sets of conditions may lead to different outcomes over time. Just to give you a quick example from my own work, looking on the adoption of e-mobility, we evaluated policies of cities, European cities, and we found out that there are at least 3 different ways in which you can get people to change from the internal combustion engine car to an electric car. So there's not one way of achieving this policy outcome. There are various ways of achieving it, and all work. So with that out of the way, we find ourselves a bit of at a conundrum, and the conundrum is as follows, and that is, if we deploy longitudinal methods such as process tracing or event sequence analysis, then we will be able to explain a particular outcome of a single process. So we do the in-depth analysis, we do the time series, we look at the series of events that have happened over time, and then we can explain why a certain process went in a certain direction. However, these methods are usually single case or single process, I would say, and they really struggle with comparisons between processes. For practical reasons, it's extremely data hungry, but you very quickly also run into logical problems. So that's the one side. The other side is we can deploy comparative methods such as qualitative comparative analysis. And these comparative methods perform really well in highlighting the sets of conditions that recur across cases, including conjunctions, to show or to differentiate between what is the conjunctions that apply to the entire sample or to a subset of the sample, and those conditions that are basically idiosyncratic and don't need to be discounted for. However, the comparative methods struggle with changes over time. So the study into e-mobility that I discussed in the previous slide basically looked at adoption rate, right? So the rate at which people were likely to shift from normal cars or standard vehicles to electric vehicles. But a rate is a change over time, and that's where we already started to where everything started to feel a bit weird, because it's a policy is being implemented that rolls out over time, and then people slowly adopt it. So while the comparative method was really useful there for showing these conjunctions of conditions, we struggled with the time aspect. So what to do? We believe that there's really room to merge different approaches. And to this end, we are developing something that we call configurational event type analysis. And at some point, we'll come up with a sexier name. But for now, it does what it says. It works, I suppose. So what we do here in configurational event type analysis is basically merging QCA and ESA, so qualitative comparative analysis and event sequence analysis, where we compare the sequence of types of events. And we do that on purpose because every day in social life, there are so many events, but not all these events matter. And in order to cluster that, in order to come up with something workable, we look at event types. So let's say archetypes of events that may occur in a certain sequence across different cases, where these types of events are considered conditions. So here's where we merge ESA with QCA. The presence of the absence or the absence of a condition, or perhaps even a degree thereof, but for now we're using a crisp version. So the presence of the absence of a condition is then shorthand for saying that an event of that type is occurring, and where the comparison between processes show which event types precede others, where at some point, if you do this properly, we believe that you can say that a certain event type has caused the other. Again, I'm very cautious when it comes to using the word causality or causing, but if you notice that certain event types precede others, and that this happens across sets of cases, then at some point you may say, well, interestingly, but this event type always seems to co-occur or even follow from or lead to the other event type. And so in doing that properly, you could map a causal chain, if you will, that doesn't take into place the multifinality, the equifinal nature of emergent social processes. Now, this is all, we're happy about this part, but we also run into many challenges, and that's what the series is about ultimately, right? First is a very pragmatic, no, it's not pragmatic, it's a practical, sorry, that's the right word, a very practical challenge, which is that if we merge different versions of methods into a new version, then to what extent do we need to adhere to all the logical operations from all these different methods? QCA is rooted in set theory, which is a very different beast from ESA, which is much more on a variable-based language and has relationships to DNA sequencing. So very different languages. And we spent a lot of time trying to bridge these two. And at some point we're wondering, should we actually bother with this? Is this actually important if the conceptual framework is quite, I think, easy to understand? That's one thing. The second trouble we deal with is the practical feasibility of doing this. Earlier on, I said that we work with qualitative data, but you can also work with quantitative data. And I think in some cases, the distinction between qualitative and quantitative is not even useful. But what we noticed doing this in the field is that it is extremely labor intensive. This is not just looking at some core variables that you can do a time series with. This means that every process needs to be teased out. Yeah, that basically means a lot of work. For the Dutch government, I did this for the debacle of the high-speed railway trains in the Netherlands. I think the Dutch people in the audience will still be familiar with the thing called Vira. Well, we did an evaluation for that, but just processing all the documents and all the things that happened in that process, it took us ages. I think half a year and 2 people. So, and last but not least, and there's the thing about, this method is data hungry. And not only do you need a lot of data, but what we also discovered is sort of whenever we find groups of events, then there's other groups of events underneath it. So in other words, every stone you turn around reveals another stone to be turned around. And there is no natural limit for telling you to stop here or to keep digging further, because yeah, well, there's no natural limits. It's simple of that. Of course, when you could say, the one thing that has caused the other thing would be your natural limit, but we're looking at groups of events rather than a singular event because of the way that complex reality plays out. So that's where we are right now. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much, Federica, for this very kind invitation. I'll stop sharing now so we can move to the next one.
Okay, thank you very much, Lasse.